We're going to do Daniel. Jesus called Daniel the prophet. See the word, the end of civilization? What does that mean? In the word that we usually people oftentimes talk about the end of the world. Has anybody ever said to you, the end of the world is coming? You get ready, the end of the world. Actually, in Greek, the word we translate world really means the system of order. Okay? It's what's beautiful, what's poetic, what's nice, what we love, right? That system of order is going to end. What's going to happen? Jesus is going to set up his kingdom. And when he does, it's not going to be like our world at all. It's going to be a different world, a world of justice, truth, and green prosperity. You like green prosperity? You like green things? Okay, so let's take a, this is the temple that existed, probably a picture of. It's not probably like the ones you see in a picture book, but this is the Temple of Jerusalem as described by a guy named Flavius Josephus, who lived at that time, who actually gives you the dimensions of the different parts of the temple. And this is a picture based on his description, not on the way most people try to figure it out. And over to the left, that's the temple itself. The top of the temple was built out of white limestone, gold around the top, gold foil all around the top, beautiful building. Then in the middle is this part with these porticos. Then this bigger part was the Roman fortress. And they had a big tower, and they had these two little walkways down there. And when if there was any riots, the soldiers would come out and they could shoot the rioters right there. Boom. They were very afraid of the Jews because they thought that they were going to rebel. Why did the Jews want to rebel? Because they read the book of Daniel, right? They knew that Messiah was coming. And they were expecting when Messiah comes, we're going to kick the Romans out and we're going to set up the kingdom. And so as they left the temple, the disciples said to Jesus, look at all these buildings. Isn't it glorious and it's beautiful? Look at all these buildings. And Jesus said to them, not one stone will be left on top of another. It's all going to fall down. And boy, they were shocked. He's the Messiah. He's going to set up the kingdom and he's going to do it now, right? And so this is, by the way, the giant stones on the eastern side, they're not there anymore. The outer wall went, in some places, it was much taller than that tower building down there where Mama Lisa lives. The outer part of the wall, really tall. That's where they threw Jesus' half-brother off the top, right? And he fell down in the bottom. And then one of the launderers down there, who was whacking clothes with a stick down there, he took the stick and whacked James on the head and killed him. So this is how they built the wall. They actually took the big stone blocks, and we don't know whether they poured the lead in there or whether they hammered it in there or whatever, but they made linkages in those rocks with lead pins that held them together because they had earthquakes out there. And guess what? None of those rocks are there anymore. Josephus describes how they did it, and we have examples elsewhere of how they did it. The stones are not there anymore. They all got leveraged down and destroyed. So later on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. And he said, what do you mean? What do you mean? What's this business? The building's going to get torn down. This is the glorious temple. You're going to be the Messiah. You're going to start the kingdom. Let's do it now, right? And he says, tell us when these things will be and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age. They asked 3 questions. And Jesus spent the longest talk that Jesus ever gave of answering people's questions is in Matthew 24, and also in Luke it describes it, where he answers their 3 questions. And it's quite a controversy. A lot of people get excited about it. But one of the things that Jesus said, this is in Matthew 24, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which is spoken through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, what did he say to do? Run. Get out. Don't go down and get your coat. Get out of town. Run for the hills. Don't wait, because then, he said, there will be great tribulation. And great tribulation means big trouble. And it says it's not little trouble. This is the biggest trouble that has ever been since the system of order ever started. So this is what we call the Great Tribulation. And so Daniel is an important sign of what's coming. Do you wonder what's going to happen up future? Do you say, who's going to win the next election? Daniel doesn't tell us that, but he paints with broad strokes, big strokes. He paints for you history before it happened. Do you know that there's a God? How do you know there's a God? He tells you what his plans are in advance. Isn't that wonderful to know? In fact, he says, I don't do anything unless first I tell my prophets, and they tell you, to his servants and prophets. So that kind of limits to what God is doing, and also tells you what he is doing. When you see what he says he's going to do, then you know. So Jesus called Daniel a prophet. In Daniel chapter 9, gives us a calendar. It's a different kind of calendar than you and I use. The Jews, every 7th year, your credit card got canceled. All your debts went away. Can you imagine that? Wouldn't that be neat? You could charge and charge and charge, and then on the 7th year, boom, it all zeroed out. Wouldn't that be nice? So he counts it in 7 years. Every 7 years, he counts 77s. He says 77s of years, and he describes when the Messiah is coming. And then at the end, he talks about this treaty that will be started, and the treaty will be for 7 years, and that's the last tribulation. And halfway through, there's going to be this guy who's going to, we know from other chapters in the Bible, this man is going to sit down in the temple, and he's going to say, I'm the Christ. And when he does, that's the big trouble. So there is a calendar. It isn't our calendar. By the way, Jesus told his disciples, you can't know when it's going to happen. Even I don't know. Even the angels don't know. Only the Father knows the day and the hour when I'm going to come, right? So we don't know all of these things, but when these particular things happen, boom, calendars start, right? And you can tell what Jesus is going to do. And by the way, I think that that when we're before the calendar starts, God's going to take us up. Those people who believe him, he's going to take us out of here. And when that happens, what do you think the people of the world are going to do? Well, they may, but I think they're going to be worried. They're going to say, he took out a bunch of weird people who kept saying Jesus was coming, and they're gone. And so maybe he is coming. So what can we do to stop him? Do they want Jesus to come? Do they want to lose their power of their governments and their societies and all their rules and whatever and how they make their money and all? Do they want to lose it? No, they don't want to lose it. They're going to force Israel to have a peace treaty. This is the way I interpret the Bible. And they're going to allow the Jews to rebuild the temple. And guess what's going to happen? It's going to cause more wars than they ever thought of. Right? Who's going to do it? They're going to do it. They're going to destroy their own system, and it will be violently town. Okay, about 4,000 years ago, let's figure out what's God's broad plan. What's his plan? 4,000 years, God called a pagan nomad. He lived in southern Turkey. We know that from the scripture. A lot of people think he lived in Iraq, but that isn't what it says. And he promised to bless all the families of the earth through his family. Problem was he didn't have a family, right? He believed God anyway. This was Abraham, right? And God said, I count your belief as righteousness. And he says, I'm going to do this. It's not on you. I'm doing it. I've got a plan. I'm going to do it. And later on, by the way, this is what these guys look like, maybe. I've showed you these pictures before. Remember? These nomads from that era, right? This is probably what the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, probably how they dressed. Women have little booties. The children are all packed on the back of a donkey. And the men have weird weapons, not like the weapons we have today, anyway. And so then, God took the family of his grandson, Jacob, whom he called Israel, and he gave them the lands of this extremely wicked people called the Canaanites. The Canaanites would, every so many years, their god Marduk or Baal, or we would call him Jupiter, would disappear from the sky. And when he did, they said, we got to do a bunch of stuff, and they kill little babies. They do all kinds of wicked things, trying to get Baal to come back up again. Right? And we know that because we have their writings. And he sent judges and prophets to teach them to worship him alone. But what did they do? They kept on worshiping the planet gods. They kept doing what the other nations were doing. Finally, he allowed the pagan nations to come and take them captive. And yet his promises to Abraham still stand. I'm going to bless all the people of the world through your family. And how will he do? How will he bring about the kingdom? How will this kingdom start? Truth, righteousness, green prosperity. How will it do it? He's got a plan, and Daniel was part of the plan. In Revelation, by the way, lists some of the things that will occur at the end of the Great Tribulation, and it includes this little phrase, the destruction of those who destroy the earth. You think we're destroying the earth? You think maybe it's our society that's doing it? Can you get away from plastics? Is it possible? Is it possible to get away from the air that's full of PFAs, this chemicals that we put on the bottom of our pans so they don't stick? We've done some pretty serious damage to the world. In my opinion, you don't have to believe my opinion, technological societies are incompatible with the earth. The more we do it, the more we destroy it, and we can't figure out how to get out of it. You know who's going to figure it out? Who's going to do it? Jesus is going to come and save us. He isn't just a savior for our sins, but he is the savior of the ground and the earth and nature and all that sort of thing. And so Daniel predicted a sequence of kingdom that started about more than 2,000 years ago. Those sequence stopped. Now this is part of next week, but let's review it. Babylon, he calls it Nebuchadnezzar. What did Babylon do to make our civilization? How many seconds are there in a minute? 60, right? How many minutes in an hour? Why is it 60? That's a weird number, isn't it? Because the Babylonians counted by 60s, right? And we got our whole system. The Babylonians invented a way of measuring things that you can't handle. You can pick up something and say how much does it weigh, or you can say how big it is, how much volume it has. But they invented a whole different system, which is the basis of science. They started. Persia came along and they invented moneyed economies and federal multiculturalism. They are a very, very important part of our culture today. Then the Greeks, they invented mathematical science, right? Each of them built on the previous set of empires. And then Rome, they made three-part governments. You know how their three-part governments work? One part was like a king. One part was like democracy. You've got to elect people, right? And one part was like the rich guys, right? The oligarchs, the guys who and so they put these three parts together and they gave no one of those parts full power. They said because they distrusted power. What do we call those kind of governments? Republics, isn't it? Republics. That comes from the word respublica, which is a Roman name for their system. Interesting, isn't it? Do we imitate them? Do we call our Senate because of their Senate? I think so, right? So that's part of it. Then the Renaissance came along. The Renaissance is a bunch of Italians. They read a bunch of these papers and books and stuff like that, and they said, let's bring it back. Let's rebirth it. Let's restore the old system. And that happened, probably beginning about 800 years ago. And then what did those European people do? They colonized the world, didn't they? And everywhere they went, they taught people how to write with the Roman alphabet. The Filipinos had their own alphabet before the Spanish came in there and said, no, you're going to use our alphabet, right? And so, they changed everything they went, and they restored it. So today, if you go to North Korea, the North Koreans call their system the People's Republic. Isn't that interesting? If you don't vote for Kim Jong-un, will you live long? Probably not, right? So, the system is worldwide today. This system is what Jesus is going to change, okay? It's probably the most influential part of your life. You go to school to learn to think and learn to act within the society, the social values, the system that we live in. That's going to change when Jesus comes. So then there's an era of division, iron and clay. We're going to do that next week. And then God removes his people. Then there's the peace treaty. Israel is disarmed, temple is rebuilt. So then there's the tribulation era, the great tribulation. Then after 3.5 years of the great tribulation, the kingdom begins. We know that from Daniel and Revelation, okay? Let me read you this verse. There is swearing, deception, murder, stealing, and adultery. They employ violence so that bloodshed follows bloodshed. You think that might be our world? Therefore, the land mourns, and everyone who lives in it languishes. If the wickedness multiplies, does it affect everybody? It affects everybody. The whole culture, the whole world is affected, along with the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky, and also the fish of the sea disappear. Ever wonder why the fish of the sea disappear? There's some mean dudes out there just harvesting as much fish as they possibly can, isn't it? There's people digging up the world. Jesus is going to come, and when he comes, don't think that the governments are going to fix it. Jesus is going to fix it. You understand that? That's a different system. Don't figure, hey, we're going to vote for this guy or that guy or whatever, and they've got plans and they're going to fix it. They're going to mess it up. I'll tell you that. They're going to make it worse. They're not going to fix it. Jesus is coming, and he's going to fix it. And it's not going to be like our world, and it's going to be a place of peace and justice and truth. And by the way, all the religions of the world will fail. All the governments of the world will fail. Everything fails except Jesus is going to set up his system. That's what we look forward to. And so let's talk about what the world was like when Daniel was a boy. The world was, Assyria dominated the Middle East for 300 years. Assyria was a land, if you watched war a few years ago, they had a city called Mosul, and the Battle of Mosul up in places up there where Kurt goes in Kurdistan. Mosul was probably, we know that Mosul was Nineveh. It was the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and they were brutal people. They were the first army that wore boots. Most armies wore sandals. Even the Romans wore sandals. They were tough boys, and they killed you so quickly. They had so many ways, and they conquered, and they did some nasty things. This is a picture from 2,850 years ago of a king of Israel. He's the guy that's bowing down. His name is Jehu, and he goes in there, and he's bowing down to the Assyrian king. He's paying him off, right? He said, I'm going to give you a bunch of money and give you taxes to you if you don't invade my country. Right? That's how the system worked. It was a payola thing. I want you to notice that some of the people that are around him holding little fly swats or something, and some of them have weapons. They don't have beards. The king has a beard. Remember that, okay? Here's the guys who are bringing the loot that they're giving to this Assyrian king. These are Israelites. Notice what kind of hats they wear. Have like a little knit cap, don't they? Those are Israelites bringing the loot, the taxes to pay the Assyrians off, right? So then 100 years later, the Assyrians came back and they wiped out Israel. 100 years later, they came and they destroyed Israel. And what did happen to all the people? Well, they had a very simple solution to the problem. They said, we deport everybody, all the people, the men, women, children, everybody moves. We're going to move you to another country. And you're not going to be able to fight for this country anymore because this country will not have any of you living in it. And that's when this is a picture from one of the Assyrians. There's a woman, there's actually an ox cart here. She's sitting up there, all their stuff, their babies, everybody. The man's hauling stuff. They're all moving. They're going into exile. The 10 tribes of Israel went into exile. Where did they go? Interesting where they went. I think the best evidence is they went to northern Pakistan and southern Afghanistan. Those are the lost tribes of Israel. I think there's some evidence for that. We won't go into that. But anyway, these are the Pashtun tribes and they have stories about their first king's name was Saul and so on. They remember where they came from, right? Some of them have gray eyes. You see the girl with the gray eyes? They're beautiful people. And And by the way, they're the Taliban, right? They're the nastiest people on the earth. They don't treat women right. They're nasty people. But you know what's going to happen during the tribulation? Some of these people are going to be the missionaries of that era. We know that from the book of Revelation. God's going to call those people, some of those people who are scattered around, and they're going to be the missionaries that are going to tell people the good news. And the good news of that era will be a little different than the good news of our era. The good news will be Jesus came, he died for you, and he's coming again, and he's going to do it now. Get ready, right? And they're not going to say, well, let's think about it. No, you don't have to think about it. He's coming, and we know he's coming, and get ready. So it's going to, and if you do trust Jesus, there are going to be a bunch of people that want to kill you. So it's going to be a really nasty scene, right? So anyway, this is Nineveh, 2,640 years ago. I'm giving you in terms of where we are today, how long ago it was. Nineveh was destroyed. That was 612 BC. Apparently there was a flood of the river. The river flooded, washed away some of the walls of the city, which is now what we call Mosul. The consortium of Babylonians and Medes came in and burned the temples and burned the palaces, and whatever was left of the Assyrians fled, and they went to a place called Carchemish, which was on the river, the Euphrates River. This is the river that long ago Isaac took his flocks across to go back to Israel. There's a ford there where the river is wide and shallow, and that's where people got across, right? And then about 2,633 years, 609 BC, the Assyrian Empire is collapsing. They've been destroyed. Their cities destroyed. All the scavengers come in trying to figure out who we can take a piece of this thing, right? And the king of Egypt went up, and he's going to go figure out what he can do. I don't know whether he was helping the Assyrians or fighting them or whatever, but he went up, and the king of Israel, or Judah, his name was Josiah, he was a good king. He went out to fight him, and in a Megiddo, there's the big plains up there in northern Israel, he got killed in his chariot. He was a good king, but he went to fight this Egyptian. Now, what he was doing fighting the Egyptian, I don't know, but it didn't go well with him. He died. And so then, 2,633 years ago, the Battle of Carchemish happens. This is a big, serious battle that changed the world, right? And Nebuchadnezzar, who was a prince at the time, he was not the king yet, he came across the river. How he got across the river, we don't know, but he left a record of what he did. He crossed the river apparently at night, and he got behind the Egyptians, and he wiped out the Egyptian army. He wiped them out. He said not a single man survived to get back to Egypt. That's his story. He says, I chased them down, I killed every last one of them. So that's a big battle, isn't it? So this is, by the way, the Egyptian army in those days was different than it was in earlier days. They had these huge shields that were probably 4 or 5 feet high, heavy shields. And they would link their shields, and when they marched together, it was like a wall coming after you, right? And they were called heavy infantry. Heavy meaning they were heavy with stuff, right? They had heavy tools, heavy armor, and they were heavy boys, right? And it was hard to get them. But somehow the Babylonians broke up their formations or something and chased them all down and killed them. And so that leaves us 2,630 years ago, about 605 BC, 4 years later, Nebuchadnezzar conquers Jerusalem. Daniel was a young boy at that time in the city of Jerusalem. And this is the record over here written in cuneiform of what Nebuchadnezzar said. This is what I did. This is how he did it. And it fits what the Bible says. And he took hostages. Daniel was a hostage. He says, we're going to take this boy, and we're going to take him to our land, and we're going to make him learn to be like us, right? And so there's 3 kings that were there. These are not really important to us, except that we will just mention them. Jehoahaz, he was the king that came after Josiah, and he only reigned for 3 months. Apparently, the Egyptians set him up in the kingdom, and somebody else kicked him out. And the Jehoiakim lived for 8 years. Zedekiah, he was king for 11 years. In 587, Nebuchadnezzar came back and wiped the place out, destroyed the temple, took all the gold and silver, took everything. So from 605 to 587, in about 20-some years, Jerusalem was completely destroyed, right? So Think about how long ago that was. I like to try to visualize things. You like to visualize things? Each of these packs over here is 1,000 toothpicks. Okay, the first two over there, that's 2,000 toothpicks. The other one's 600 toothpicks. 2,600 years, if each year was a toothpick, that's how many you'd have. You're counting, right? Is that a while back? It is. Do you like to visualize it when you say 600 BC? What does that mean? I don't know. If you think of it in toothpicks, I think it gives you a little visual indication. That was a long while ago, wasn't it? Okay, let's start reading Daniel. Daniel chapter 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. He was the second king, right, that Nebuchadnezzar set up. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of the Lord. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. What does his God look like? Well, this is an actual picture of Nebuchadnezzar. What did he look like? He drew himself. He carved himself on a stela. And there he is with his big old peaked hat. He's got in his right hand, he's got a stylus for writing. Remember, they wrote with clay, and they had a little stick, and it was a kind of a three-cornered stick, and they would stick it in the clay. What's he saying? I'm pretty smart. I know how to write. Right? In his other hand, he's carrying a big long stick. That's a measuring reed, a measuring stick. And he's saying, I'm pretty smart. I can survey land. Right? I know how to, people have fields. We can figure out their size. Down on the bottom of the stick, there's three little balls down there. And those are how they measured a right angle. If you took, 5, 4, and 3 is 12, right? 5 plus 4 plus 3 is 12, right? If you took a rope that was 12 units long, and you put three little balls one at 5 units, one at 4 units, one at 3 units, you took them and stretched them out and made them the corners of a triangle, you got a 90-degree angle, right? And that's how they laid out their fields. Basically, he's saying, I'm a pretty smart dude. I can write, and I know how to be a surveyor, right? And then he says, I rebuilt the ziggurat. The ziggurat was this big thing. And up on top of the ziggurat was one of the Greeks who went there a little while later after Nebuchadnezzar died. And he said up on the top of that thing, there was a golden statue of a man that was supposed to be Marduk. We would call him Jupiter, their chief god, right? And that's who they worship. This is, he says, I built it. And he writes it down all on his stone and said, that's me. I'm Nebuchadnezzar. I'm the great guy. I can do all these things. And I rebuilt this ziggurat, this temple to their god, right? Big, huge, tall building. This might be what some people visualize the temple area and the area around it. This is probably where Daniel went to school. Okay, the reason I'm showing you this is because Daniel's going there. He's being taken there as a hostage. And he's not just going to be a hostage. He said, you're going to go to school, right? And so verse 3 and 4 says, the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials. By the way, the word chief of his officials can be the chief eunuch. You know what a eunuch is? He's like a neutered cat, What's the characteristic of those people? They don't usually have beards. Okay? Think about that. And to bring some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family, and of the noble youths in whom was no blemish, no defect, who were good looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, and endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. So here's Daniel. He didn't ask to do this. They grabbed him. They said, you're going. We chose you. You're a good-looking kid, so we're going to take you, and you're going to go over here to Babylon, and you're going to learn. You're going to learn our language. You're going to learn our writing, and you're going to learn our system. By the way, remember when we studied the book of Genesis, ancient languages didn't have vowels that they wrote down. The first language that seems to have incorporated vowels was in the time of Homer, because some of his writing has early type vowels in it, right? What's a vowel? A vowel is, remember I told you this before when we were studying Genesis? A vowel is like the sound you make when your mouth is just open and you let out some air. Ah, e, o, u, right? That's a vowel, right? Ancient people didn't write down vowels. Why? They didn't think it was important, right? And even the Bible, in the Old Testament, there are no vowels at all. None. Zero. Nada, right? As originally written, it didn't. So how do you know what the word meant? Well, you looked at the context. Everybody in those days, they used context was king. And they figured out they didn't have a word for time. They didn't have verb tenses, but they knew what was going on because they knew about context. They looked at the words around it. They figured out what was going on. This is their alphabet. All the alphabets were put in clay, and all of them are consonant. Consonants are kind of guttural. They might be k, b. Use your tongue or your lips. T, l, right? Those are consonants. They're much more forceful than a vowel. A vowel is kind of like a soft sound that you just kind of let out a little air. Does that make sense? So they didn't write our vowels, but they had this way of writing, and they could spell out things. By the way, we don't know some of their words how to pronounce them, because they had one of their stories, which is very famous, and was the story about this planet called Tiamat or Tiamat. Is it Tiamat or is it Tiamat? We don't know because they didn't write vowels, right? And Tiamat was destroyed by a moon of Jupiter, smashed into it and crushed it. And in the place where they said it happened today, what do we have? We have 1 million asteroids floating around the sun. And they're all broken pieces of a planet. You think it might have happened? Right? Interesting. The Bible mentions the crushing of that planet 4 times. Did it happen? I think it did. That's a little wild, isn't it? This is their numbering system. Over there, way up on the top left, there's a 1. You took a 1, you took your little stick, and you stroked it 1 time in the clay, right? If you look down there at the bottom, it says 60 is also a 1 stroked in the clay. What's going on? They counted by 60. You go in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 59. When you got to 59, the next number over became 60. So a 1 over here was a 60, but if it was over here, it was a 1. Does that make sense to you? Do we do that? A 1 over here is a 1, but if you move it over 1 column, it's a 10. If you move over another column, it's 100. You move it over another column, it's 1,000, right? So we count by tens, right? They counted by 60. That's why our language uses 60 seconds in a minute, because we got it from them. All right? Does that make sense? Then in verse 5, and the king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed to them that they should be educated for 3 years. So now they're going to have a 3-year training class, at the end of which they are to enter the king's personal service. By the way, there are 2 prophecies in the Old Testament, one in Isaiah and one in 2 Kings. Isaiah says to one of the kings of Israel, and he says, some of your sons are going to be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. And that was a prophecy that he made. And so I would suggest to you that probably Daniel didn't have a beard. Okay? We don't know that for sure, but that's very likely what happened to him. And so now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Were there a bunch of other ones too? Yeah, he said there were several others, but there's 4 of them that were distinguished. There were others. And then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them, and to Daniel he assigned the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah he had Shadrach, and to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. By the way, those are all pagan names, right? They're commemorating pagan gods. So imagine that your mother called you something, and then you get to this place and say, "We don't like your name. We're changing your name, and you're going to be worshiping our gods and blah 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 and stuff like that." Pretty tough situation, isn't it? But what Daniel was really interesting. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. In other words, if they're having pork chops for supper, I'm not eating pork chops. Why? Because the Jewish law said you don't eat pork chops, which wasn't a bad law, by the way. The trichinosis that can reside in pork meat, if you don't cook it right, you can get terrible infections and it can really do you some damage, right? So it was not a bad, it wasn't a law that said, hey, we don't want you to enjoy life. This is something that's good for you. Stay away from pork, right? And and with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials. Notice how smart Daniel is. He's not stupid. He's going to bring this, he's going to talk to this guy in a very diplomatic way, that he might not defile himself. He said, look, I can't eat this pork chops, right? And my rules in my country, my God says I don't eat pork chops, right? And so now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. What do you think it means, forfeit your head? The king going to chop off his head because you didn't do what I told you. This Nebuchadnezzar, he didn't play around. You didn't do what he said, you were toast, right? And by the way, this is the siege of the Jewish city of Lachish, and there's the king sitting on his throne. There's the soldiers all have beards. The guys behind them don't. Remember that? They're trying to explain that to you. But Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. And let our appearance be observed in your presence, and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. Good little experiment, isn't it? I think he's got a little faith, doesn't he? He's expecting God to be able to do something for him, right? And he said, look, I'm not going to eat pork chops. Why don't you just give me vegetables? By the way, drinking water was not considered to be a healthy thing. If you went down to the river and got a cup of water, people were doing their laundry, they're throwing their garbage in the river, they probably didn't know about bacteria back then, but usually people would put a little bit of wine in their water to kind of kill off, maybe it killed the flavor, kill some of the bacteria in there. So wine was used kind of like we would use, chlorine in our water or something, right? And so he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and the wine that they were to drink, and kept giving them vegetables. By the way, they had records. One of the things that we found, the people who were digging around in Babylon, the excavators, they found the records of how much they fed the Jewish king who had been taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar. They have the record of how much food they gave him every day, right? So we know that he was taken back to Babylon, and they held him prisoner there, and they fed him, and they have the record of how much they fed him every day. Isn't that interesting? It kind of corroborates the Bible, doesn't it? So, by the way, Babylon was a great place for growing vegetables. Herodotus went there 100 years or so later, and they have canals, and the canals go between the rivers. The fields are watered with water canals. If you paid your taxes, you had to dig canals. That was part of paying your taxes. So they grew dates. Dates in the desert. Dates love sunshine, but they could water them because they had water from the rivers, and they had canals that watered the fields. It was really, they could raise 3 crops a year because they watered it, and it was warm all the time. Right? And so here he is. He's eating vegetables. And as for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom, and Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. Now think about, he's going to school, his teachers are going to teach him. We have the records that some of these papers were some of these documents, clay tablets, were in the library of this king in Nineveh. And they've got the library, all the clay tablets were stacked in orders, fire came, burned them, and one of the documents, Enuma Anu Enlil, is a document that tells them they had 7,000 omens. So an omen, if you saw something, you said, what's going to happen next, right? So you would have to memorize all these omens. This is part of what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be able to predict the future by looking at different signs and what the planets were doing and what the water was doing and different. They were omen worshipers or omen predictors. And so here he is. He's learning on their omens, but he's not following them. He's got a better way. He's smarter than they are. You know anybody smarter than their teacher? It's pretty rare, isn't it? Usually you learn from your teacher. He's being taught the Babylonian system, and he's smarter than the Babylonians themselves, right? Isn't that neat? God gave him wisdom and discernment and understanding. At the end of the days, which the king had specified for presenting them, the commanded officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king talked with them. And out of them all, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered in the king's personal service. Interesting. The king interviews him. And he says, tell me what you would do here. Tell me how you figure out this omen. Is this omen? No, it's not that omen. Let me tell you how to do it, right? So Daniel, although he memorized all the stuff that they told him, he had a different way of looking at it, didn't he? He looked at it from a different perspective, and he was wiser than they are. And so, for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in all his realm. And for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them. So that's what happened. This, by the way, and Daniel continued till the first year of Cyrus, the king who was a Persian king, right? This is an image of what he may have looked like. He had a funny looking helmet on, but and that would be somewhere around 539 BC when Cyrus, by the way, the Persians call him Cyrus. Why do they do that? Remember, the vowels were weird, right? We don't know how they really pronounced it. And so he ended up conquering Babylon. Daniel lived all the way into his 80s or 90s, serving the king of Babylon all the way until the reign of Cyrus, who conquered Babylon, right? And what happened then? Do you remember what happened? Daniel was in the lion's den. Remember the story? He was an old man. He wasn't a young man. He was an old man. He was like 80 or 90 years old. And he had values, didn't he? He stuck by his stuff. He says, I will not bow down. I will not do this and that. I always pray to my God every day. And remember, they conspired. We'll get to that story later if I live that long, right? But anyway, let me give some application here. James says, but if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given him. Will God hold you and say, well, you were stupid back then, so I'm not going to give you any wisdom? If you ask him, he'll give you wisdom. He will not restrain it. He will give you what you need, right? Now, here's the thing, but he must ask in faith without any doubting, for the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. By the way, when the wind blows one way, which way do the waves go? They go that way, right? The wind blows another way, it goes another way. The tops of the waves are flowing. Have you ever been in a typhoon? The tops of the waves are just flying around. You can't tell the difference between the rain and the tops of the waves. They're just blowing around, right? And if the wind blows one direction for a long while, the waves will build up bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So for that man ought not to expect that he will receive anything from the Lord, being a double-minded and unstable in all his ways. If you ask for God for wisdom, don't try to make his wisdom fit the world's wisdom. It isn't going to fit. So if you try it and you work at trying to make the two systems fit together, don't expect God to give you wisdom. Daniel did the opposite. He said, I'm not going to play your game. I'm going to trust God, and I'm going to stick to my values, even in little things like I'm not going to worry about my diet. And God gave him wisdom. So this would be a ship tossed by the waves, right? What's wisdom? What's wisdom? Wisdom is not knowledge. You can be the smartest guy around and be the dumbest person when it comes to being wise. Because wise is applied knowledge. You know how to live. You know how to make decisions. You know how to do the right kind of decisions. That's different, isn't it? You cannot buy wisdom with pure gold. That's Job chapter 28. And then Job says, when he imparted weight to the wind and he meted out the waters by measure, when he set a limit for the rain. Remember in the beginning of the world, it didn't rain for a while? And a course for the thunderbolt. Ever try to figure out how thunderbolts work? Sometimes a thunderbolt will go down, and if it's real strong, there's another one that goes up, all the way up in the stratosphere. Really, really weird stuff. How does it work? We don't know, but it works. Then he saw it, and he declared it, and established it. He also searched it out, and he said to man, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. What's the fear of the Lord? I like to think of it this way. I'm afraid to do the things that he said are not good for me, because I know there's consequences that I'm going to do it to myself. Here's in first chapter of Proverbs. By the way, we had a missionary from our church who's been dead a number of years, Carol Hastings. Some of you may remember her. Carol Hastings read one chapter in the book of Proverbs every day for most of her life, because she said there's applied wisdom there. I'm sure she knew it all by heart. You know, every month, 12 times a year, she read the book of Proverbs. Right? Interesting. Wisdom speaks. Then they will call to me. Why are they calling? Because you didn't listen to me. But I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. Wisdom is a person here speaking, and he says, hey, if you mess up and you don't want to listen and you want to go your own way, the day will come when you say, hey, I want wisdom now. It's too late. You already did it. Right? You already messed up. They would not accept my counsel. They spurned all my reproof. So they shall eat the fruit of their own way and be satiated with their own desires. For the waywardness of the naive will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. But he who listens to me, listens to what? The word of God, right? Shall live securely, and he shall be at ease from the dread of evil. So that's wisdom. Daniel has it. A lot of people in Babylon didn't have it. Right? Interesting. Okay, next week, if you want to come next week, I suggest you read Daniel chapter 2. Very, very important chapter, because that's kind of the history of the civilization that we live in. Where did we come from? We came from those 4 pagan empires that were reconstituted, and that's our civilization. That's where we are. And so we're going to do that next week. All right, Mr. Kurt.